This is the Sri Lanka Broadcasting Corporation.
The time is precisely 1:15 p.m. This is the Sri Lanka Broadcasting Corporation. Here's the news edited by Lal Mallavarachchi and read by Chandima Veerakon. Headlines. Ministers seek appointment of Presidential Commission to prevent violent unrest in future. World Bank is to borrow $200 million for welfare benefits. Paying wards will be set up at state hospitals. The second reading of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka bill will not be debated in Parliament this week. The debate on Express Pearl vessel commences tomorrow. The National Building Research Organisation extends the landslide warning issued to several areas. Court has issued a restraining order against a protest march commemorating the 9th of May uproar last year. The main suspect of the death of a 16-year-old schoolgirl in Kalutara was arrested. In foreign news, thousands displaced as ethnic clashes grip northeastern state of Manipur. Local stories in detail. The Cabinet of Ministers has sought the appointment of a presidential commission with absolute powers to prevent acts of violence similar to that on the 9th of May last year in the future. Cabinet spokesperson Minister Bandula Gunawardena revealed this while addressing the weekly Cabinet media briefing this morning. The ministers made this request a day ahead of the one-year commemoration of the violent unrest on May 9th. Stressing that the violent events that unfolded last year have left a black mark in the world history, Gunawardena noted that measures should be taken to ensure that such events do not take place in the future. Minister Bandula Gunawardena also said the Cabinet of Ministers had given approval for talks with World Bank to borrow $200 million for a welfare benefit. A social safety net is a priority initiative under an International Monetary Fund-backed program. Sri Lanka is planning to target welfare, the most needed recipients, and help them graduate under a strong social safety net, according to a proposal submitted by President Ranil Wickremesinghe as Finance Minister. The government has decided to establish paying wards at state hospitals across the island for both local and foreign people. The proposal presented by Health Minister Keheli Rambukwella was also approved by the Cabinet of Ministers. Prime Minister Dinesh Gunawardena told the Parliament this morning that the second reading of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka bill will not be debated in the Parliament this week. Last week, the Committee on Parliamentary Business fixed dates for the debate on the second reading of the bill on Thursday. Last month, Speaker Mahinda Yapa Abewardena conveyed the determination of the Supreme Court on this bill, which mentioned that none of the provisions in the bill are inconsistent with the Constitution. Thereby, the Supreme Court had decided that the bill could be passed by a simple majority. Addressing the parliamentary session, Premier Gunawardena said that the amendments proposed by the Supreme Court, the provisions in the bill, and its impact would be discussed at length at the Finance Ministry's Advisory Committee meeting later today. Governor of the Central Bank, Dr. Nandalal Veerasinghe, will also attend this meeting. In the meantime, a group of MPs in the opposition has handed over a letter to the Premier seeking a new draft bill instead of the proposed bill. Meanwhile, the adjournment debate on the MV Express Pearl disaster will be held tomorrow. The Aswasuma new benefit payment scheme will be taken up for debate on Friday. This news comes to you from the Sri Lanka Broadcasting Corporation.
Digital accounts can now be opened in 10 minutes. People's Bank Digital Banking, your ultimate convenience.
Continuing with the local stories, The National Building Research Organisation has extended the landslide warning issued to several areas. Accordingly, Passara in the Badulla district, Baddegama, Nagoda, Alpitiya, Yaklamulla in the Gaul district, Ududumbara in the Kandy district, Yatiyantota, Rambukkana, Daraniyagala, Mavanalla, Kagalla, Galigamu areas in the Kagalla district, Ridigama in the Kurunagala district and Pallepala Divisional Secretariat are in the Matale district are under the first phase warning notice for landslides. The Colombo Fort Magistrates Court has issued a restraining order against a protest march commemorating the 9th May uproar that took place last year. Accordingly, a restraining order has been issued preventing the protesters from entering the President's House, Presidential Secretariat, Ministry of Finance and Temple Trees. On 9th May 2022, masses of anti-government protesters took to the streets demanding the resignation of former President Gotabaya Rajapaksa and his brother, the Prime Minister at the time, Mahinda Rajapaksa. To conclude the local news, the headlines again. Ministers seek appointment of Presidential Commission to prevent violent unrest in future. World Bank is to borrow $200 million for welfare benefits. Paying wards will be set up at state hospitals. The second reading of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka bill will not be debated in Parliament this week. The debate on Express Pearl vessel commences tomorrow. The National Building Research Organisation extends the landslide warning issued to several areas. Court has issued a restraining order against a protest march commemorating the 9th of May uproar last year. The main suspect of a death of a 16-year-old schoolgirl in Kalutara was arrested. That ends the local news.
Debit card, mobile and internet banking and cardless cash accounts can now be opened in just 10 minutes with no form filling with People's Bank Digital Banking.
The main news story is brought to you by Siddhalepa Vedamahatmya.
And on the main news story, police has arrested the main suspect in connection with the recent suspicious death of a 16-year-old schoolgirl in Kalutara. He had been arrested in the Hikkadu area this morning. The 29-year-old person had allegedly accompanied the teenage girl who was later found dead near the railway track to the hotel room in Kalutara. Based on the information received by Kalutara HQI Ruwan Vijay Singha, a group of crime division officers had carried out the raid in Hikkadu area. Accordingly, the suspect will be produced before the Kalutara Magistrates Court to obtain detention orders. That ends the main news story.
The main news story was brought to you by Siddhalepa Vedamahatmya.
Taking a look at Watchlight, President Ranil Wickremesinghe has instructed the district secretaries of Anuradhapura and Polonnaruwa to make all necessary arrangements to hold the Poson Festival in a grand manner. Also, the President has instructed his Secretary Samaneka Nayaka to look into the countrywide Poson Festival activities and provide the direct support of the President's office to make the celebrations successful. Many crowds of devotees are expected to visit Anuradhapura during the Poson Festival. That ends Watchlight. On to the world news, the headlines. Thousands displaced as ethnic clashes grip northeastern state of Manipur. 3 children among victims of Allen Mall shooting in Texas. Vietnam bans anonymous social media accounts. At least 65 people have been killed in ethnic clashes in the northeastern Indian state of Manipur, with mobs attacking homes, vehicles, churches and temples, officials say. In Biren Singh, the Chief Minister of Manipur, said in a press conference yesterday that more than 200 people were injured and tens of thousands displaced in the clashes. The violence began last week after indigenous communities held a rally to protest against demands by the main ethnic group in the state of tribal status. Members of the Métis community, who account for 53% of the state's population, have been demanding inclusion under a scheduled tribe category for years, which will give them access to forest lands and guarantee them a proportion of government jobs and places in educational institutions. A 3-year-old boy and his parents, 2 elementary school children and a young engineer from India have been named as victims of a shooting attack in Texas on Saturday. James Cho died alongside his parents Cho Kyu-song, 37, and Kang Shin-young, 35, according to reports. His 6-year-old brother was injured but survived. The identifications come as officials probe whether the killer had links to any far-right organizations or beliefs. Social media users in Vietnam must soon verify their identities in what the government says is a bid to crack down on online scams. The move will enable them to track down offenders who use anonymous accounts to break the law. Unverified accounts on platforms such as Facebook will be dealt with, said an official who did not elaborate. It's the latest in a series of restrictions imposed on social media users in Vietnam. To conclude the world news, the headlines again. Thousands displaced as ethnic clashes grip northeastern state of Manipur. 3 children among victims of Allen Mall shooting in Texas. Vietnam bans anonymous social media accounts. That ends the world news.
Development news.
On development news, the Emirates has pledged its renewed support to promoting tourism in Sri Lanka through a memorandum of understanding signed with the Sri Lanka Tourism Promotion Bureau. The agreement outlines a host of initiatives designed to promote the nation's tourism and trade industries and comes as part of the airline's long-standing commitment to Sri Lanka spanning 37 years. That ends the development news. We take a look at the sports news next. Bangladesh women won the first T20 match against Sri Lanka women played at the SSC grounds in Colombo today by 6 wickets. Batting first, Sri Lanka women scored 145 runs for 6 wickets in their 20 overs. In reply, Bangladesh women passed the victory target for the loss of 4 wickets in 19.5 overs. That ends the sports news.
Go ekak thiyana youth eකට life ekේ change eකට නියමෙට set වෙන්න අහගෙන දැකපු ගීන හැබැ කරන්න youth eකට නියමෙට set වෙන friendship එක මෙන්න.
The all-new NSB Ithru Mithru account, NSB IM, a plan for your dream.
Business News, sponsored by National Savings Bank, the safest place for your money.
Sri Lanka's shares gained yesterday on the banking sector after interest had sparked in the largest counter after debt optimization assurances were prompted to investors, and analysts said. The main all-share price index was up 1.09% or 96.22 points to 8,926.58, while the most liquid index, S&P SL20, was up 1.36% or 34.37 points to 2,593.44. That ends Business News.
Business News, sponsored by National Savings Bank, the safest place for your money.
Go ekak thiyana youth eකට life ekේ change eකට නියමෙට set වෙන්න ඇස් වහගෙන දැකපු ගීන හැබැ කරන්න youth එකට නියමෙට set වෙන friendship එක මෙන්න.
The all-new NSB Ithru Mithru account, NSB IM, a plan for your dream.
Economic news, courtesy of... For the 5th consecutive year, LOLC is awarded People's Financial Services Brand of the Year at the 2022 Slim Kantar People's Awards. As the People's Financial Services Brand of the Year, LOLC continues to place the customer first, and this has won the hearts, minds and trust of Sri Lankans, with yet another prestigious award as proof of this lasting commitment. LOLC. Imagine the possibilities.
And on economic news, the Foreign Ministry said Sri Lanka and the European Union will discuss GSP Plus trade benefits from today onwards during an EU-Sri Lanka Joint Commission meeting. The Joint Commission will deliberate on a broad range of bilateral and multilateral issues of mutual interest to both sides and discuss areas for future cooperation. The European Union delegation will brief on the new cycle of the EU GSP regulation to be adopted for 2024-2033, which will be effective from the 1st of January 2024 for the next 10 years. That ends economic news.
LOLC Finance is taking the power of innovation to the next level, winning 5 golds at the Technovation Awards 2022, leading the digital revolution with cutting-edge interbanking digital payments. LOLC Finance claims the overall gold award whilst also claiming an extraordinary victory in digital banking.
Weather report.
And finally, we take a look at the weather report. The Met Department says showers or thundershowers will occur at times in the western, Sabragamur, central, northwestern and southern provinces. Several spells of showers will occur in the northern province. Showers or thundershowers will occur at several places elsewhere over the island, particularly during the afternoon or at night. Strong winds about 40 to 45 kilometers per hour can be expected at times over western and southern coastal areas and along the western slopes of the central hills. That ends the weather report. And to conclude this bulletin of news, the headlines again. Ministers seek appointment of Presidential Commission to prevent violent unrest in future. World Bank is to borrow $200 million for welfare benefits. Paying wards will be set up at state hospitals. The second reading of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka bill will not be debated in the Parliament this week. The debate on Express Pearl vessel commences tomorrow. The National Building Research Organisation extends the landslide warnings issued to several areas. Court has issued a restraining order against a protest march commemorating the 9th of May uproar last year. The main suspect of the death of a 16-year-old girl in Kalutara was arrested. Foreign news, thousands displaced as ethnic clashes grip northeastern state of Manipur. With that, we conclude this bulletin of news